Muriel, you want to jump in there, and I would love to also hear you say something about who are we not talking about, whether it's the other accelerators in 5G or the laggards personally in 5G. Who else needs to be spoken about as we sort of look at U.S. policy, U.S.-Japan policy?
Right. I think I also wanted to build on Elsa's point about after if the President-elect Biden probably has a more multilateral approach and will continue on the ongoing, probably the bilateral dialogues that's been held between the US, Japan. So just wanted to highlight some of the developments over the past years. Between US and Japan, there has been a director level discussions under the US-Japan policy cooperation dialogue on internet economy, which has recognized the need for cooperation on trusted and secure and interoperable digital infrastructure in third countries. And then over the past 2 years, it has been recognition of the value for the two countries to cooperate to promote this open network ecosystem. And this latest dialogue that just came and a readout that just came out in September really highlights specifics in how they can cooperate in multilateral standard setting processes or in the Prague conferences, as Elsa just mentioned. So also wanted to highlight on that. And also being the UK, I think in terms of the laggards, it's really great to see lots of discussions on vendor diversity in the United Kingdom, but it's also for instance, the UK faces challenges that the ongoing discussions for diversification, new ecosystem, when we talk about the new structure of open architecture by disaggregating hardware and software components, the UK doesn't have a strong hardware equipment supplier or software equipment supplier. So they want this open RAN policy and strategy based on open RAN, but has to rely on suppliers like US and Japanese vendors. They've been inviting NEC from the Japan side, like NEC or Rakuten's new communication platforms with virtualized RAN, or US Alistar or on Mavenir. But and then UK has recognized that. So it's also interesting thing that I'm very interested in watching is this multilateral cooperation under this. I'm sure you've all seen this news from the Times around May, that the proposal of the Democratic 10, which includes the G7 countries, India, South Korea, and Australia, or some new frameworks like T12, some discussions around that, including more cyber countries with cyber capabilities like Israel. But very interesting to see how these new proposals on these multilateral cooperation would be discussed in the new administration.
There's so much going on in this discussion. I almost closed myself out. I apologize. That I need 5G, obviously, to have this conversation. I had to throw in one 5G joke. But there's so much in this conversation, and I do agree with you. I think we're seeing so much more conformity and so much more of a push to try to figure out where are those areas that we could actually collaborate. But one thing that we haven't talked about in this conversation, and Muriel, I want to come back over to you, is that 5G is not going to get to everybody. And there will be some exacerbated digital gaps. I mean, as Elsa mentioned, in this country, we're seeing 50 million school-age kids that did not were sent home, 15 to 16 without broadband access in the home. 5G is going to be the same way. This is not necessarily because we are in an accelerated digital economy because of the pandemic that we're going to turn on the switch and everybody's going to have 5G. I would first love to hear from you. I mean, what are developing countries doing to sort of look at these technology gaps that are being created by the lack of access to these more advanced and more robust technologies?
That's a very good question, Nicole. So a lot of developing countries actually are turning to Wi-Fi, okay? Because again, it's there, it's much cheaper, and it does pretty well. And in some cases, you actually get a fairly good infrastructure just through Wi-Fi connections. It's also something that we see for price competition in the US. I would say probably started more in Europe, sort of free in France is probably the poster child of that, where basically just using the set-top boxes of individual users who obtain some sort of benefit from allowing their spare Wi-Fi capacity to be used. They basically were able to provide a free service. I mean, they bought, just because for regulatory reasons they had to buy a few base stations, they went ahead and did that, but just a risible small number, just so that they could be a phone company. I mean, you see this working out in the New York, New Jersey area, right? With some companies trying to prevent other companies from saying that they're phone companies because they're only using Wi-Fi. I think satellite, as I mentioned before, is going to be very important. Some of my own research on the very much we work in nonprofit with collaborators in Denmark and also in New Zealand to provide service to underserved Pacific islands, using existing satellite systems, which are very expensive to just rent, and we do coding so that they can get better service. So I think it's a hodgepodge. Very often, again, they'll take a combination of old technologies, so that they will buy old technologies, whether again they've been amortized here, but as I said, they work just fine. They've been maybe amortized in other countries, but they work just fine. And they do a lot of Wi-Fi. So I think there's a lot of quite creative things going on there. I just wanted to make a quick comment about policy and ORAN. There is a policy push towards ORAN, but if you look at the engineering reality, even companies that have signed up to ORAN are in effect maintaining it as a very small sliver because it goes against their business interests. I encourage everybody to look at sites like SDX. I'm not going to name companies, but go and look at one of the current SDX. So for SD, software defined. Elsa and Yuka talked about software defined areas. And ORAN takes lumps. This is not just a question of policy going to the companies and companies say, yeah, sure, I'll do that. It's not. There's a big gap very often between the engineering reality and what has been agreed to in terms of policy. I just wanted to bring that up.
I think that that's actually an important piece. And I love the way you also frame what developing countries may actually rely upon if they do not get 5G, which brings me to this other question before we go into Q&A. I'm sitting here right now trying to figure out these Q&A and how we'll actually do that.